So today we are going to be talking about something that I was very passionate about over the summer with the release of Stephenie Meyer's new book, Midnight Sun, and that is why the Twilight Saga is racist. I just know I'm about to whack the hornet's nest with this one, so let's just head to the roadmap. Today's roadmap is going to consist of these points. It's going to be a lot, so just bear with me. The first point is why this is titled An English Major Explains instead of Can the Indian Read. The second one is going to be talking about the book series. The third one is going to be the movie series, like the movie franchise. The fourth point is going to be the things that change from the book to movie adaptation. The point after that is going to be talking about the religious themes that are present within the franchise, and then the next point is going to be why it's not just problematic, it's like pretty definitive that it is a racist text at its foundation. And then the next thing, which is the last thing before the wrap-up and final thoughts section, is the hot take about this fandom, about this franchise, about this whole piece of media. Alright, so let's get to the first point. So the first thing I want to talk about is why this is called An English Major Explains instead of Can the Indian Read. The reason why I wanted to title this with An English Major Explains instead of Can the Indian Read is mainly because there are so many more issues structurally with the book, with the series, with the franchise, than just anti-Indigenous racism. I can read her fetishization of Taylor Lautner and the very real Quileute tribe, as well as Indigenous people as a whole, from the perspective of an Afro-Indigenous person. But there are so many other issues like anti-Black racism, sexism, weird incestuousness, and general Mormon-flavored white supremacy that I want to expand into general literary criticism instead of focusing solely on Indigenous representation within literary criticism. Because, as I just said, it's not just the fact that this is something that negatively affected the way people within the mainstream culture view Indigenous people as characters within media or Indigenous people in real life. It was also a huge thing of colorism and anti-Black racism and sexism and misogyny and all that stuff. So just going over all of that is more, I want to say, I guess, general to literary criticism, which is why I just put An English Major Explains. So with that being said, let's get into the thick of it. So in regard to the Twilight book saga, it was released in Stephenie Meyer beginning in 2005 with the first book, the title Twilight, which is then followed by New Moon in 2006, Eclipse in 2007, Breaking Dawn in 2008, and Midnight Sun last year, 2020. There are also 3 companion books according to the Wikipedia entry, which means the series extends over 8 total books. But I have no interest in talking about them, so I won't. This series chronicles the story of a human girl named Bella and her relationships with the vampire Edward and his family, the Cullens, and werewolf Jacob and his family, the Blacks. More on both of those things in a minute. Bella moves from Phoenix, Arizona to Forks, Washington with her father, Charlie, who is a cop. The Cullen family consists of Edward, his adoptive parents, Carlisle and Esme, and his adopted siblings, Emmett, Alice, Rosalie, and Jasper Hale. The Cullen family identifies as vegetarian vampires, which is defined by drinking the blood of animals rather than humans. Edward himself is changed by Carlisle, who was his attending doctor during the 1918 Spanish influenza, who had presented this as the only way to save Edward's life. So at the time of publishing, we'll say Edward is about 103 years old, something like that. Also, even though everyone knows Jasper and Alice as brother and sister, they are in fact husband and wife, and it just passes without comment in both the books and the movies. Gross. In the initial book, there isn't a lot said about Jacob's family, just that his father and Charlie are old friends, and that over time, because of that proximity, they grow close. In the later books, Meyer expanded on this by including his deceased mother, Sarah, 2 older sisters, Rachel and Rebecca, and his great-grandfather, Ephraim. The foundation of the series is that Bella is pulled between this romantic attraction to this mysterious, pale-skinned stranger, and the emotional bond she has with the person she's known for a long time and sees as a close friend, which leads me to the subject of character representation and dynamics within the books. I want to look at character dynamics for a brief moment because I feel like this is a very specific effect that is doubled down on in the transition from book to film, especially surrounding Bella. Bella seems to be the center of the swirling gyre of conflict between sparkling light-skinned Edward and savage brown-skinned Jacob. I really wouldn't take issue with it if it was just these three characters and their idiosyncrasies as individuals, but Stephenie Meyer specifically engages with this anti-Indigenous and anti-Black racism in a way that is explicitly specific to her Mormon background. When he can't force himself on Bella, Jacob goes and imprints on her infant daughter Renesmee, which is not how imprinting works in the real world, but whatever, which inherently positions Jacob as a sexual predator, even though he is a young adult infatuated with Bella, who is another young adult, and Edward is a 103-year-old man who almost killed her with his penis. It harkens back to this explicitly white supremacist narrative, and that white women are these pillars of innocence and white identity, and then all non-white people are seeking to claim white territory through impregnating and ingratiating themselves with white women. It inherently ties the proliferation of the Cullen family to Bella and this baby she's carrying, and that Jacob nor any one of his tribe is allowed near her, as though she is to remain unspoiled by his savagery. I also think that contributes to this prevailing social culture during the 1800s that was meant to put people off the abolition of chattel slavery and the integration of society, that all Black people and African American people needed to be beneath white people and be subjected to backbreaking labor and abuse, because otherwise they would experience mental breakdowns and start attacking white people. That is not a joke. That is a real thing people actually believed. That was also a line of logic that was peddled by Christian and Catholic missionaries at the outset of colonization within the establishments of missions and indigenous people, being used as slave labor in order to build these institutions that would eventually facilitate their oppression. More on that in the next section. So, talking about the Twilight movie saga, I'm only going to get into casting for the movies because Stephenie Meyer's weird religiously based racism even extended to the casting of the movies, even for the most minor of roles. The main cast, the big three, is that Edward is played by Robert Pattinson, Jacob is played by Taylor Lautner, fun fact, who is not native, and Bella is played by Kristen Stewart. Here's some significant roles that come into play during the last few movies, because the casting choices made by Stephenie Meyer were very intentional. As the director of the first movie, I'm going to go over her comments. So James's Coven, he is the main antagonist of the first Twilight book and is classified as a tracker vampire who hunts humans and animals just for the fun of it. He has beef with the Cullen family because he's tried to kill Alice once before. Victoria is his girlfriend, and she has very, very, very red hair, which to me is significant because literally every other vampire in the movie either has brown or black hair, with the occasional blonde person mixed in for flavor. It's significant because for so long in human history, at least in the United States, people with red hair were portrayed as evil, immoral, and during the Salem witch trials it was even a feature that made your fellow neighbor consider that you were a direct relative of the devil. So that's something to think about in relation to all the stuff I'm going to say in a minute. Laurent is the single Black character in this entire movie franchise, and is killed by the Quaalude when trying to attack Bella. More on this later. The movies were released as follows. Twilight, the original movie, was released in 2008. The Twilight Saga New Moon was released in 2009. The Twilight Saga Eclipse was released in 2010. And then the Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn, those movies were split into two parts, the first being released in 2011 and the next being released in 2012. When it comes from changes from the book to the movie, apparently in the screen adaptation phrase, Meyer had a lot of issue with the possibility that her books could be so different from their original form that nobody would be able to recognize them, which is like a valid fear if like something you've written is being turned into a major motion picture. I mean, like, you kind of want people to make the association between the thing that you wrote and the thing that they're going to visually see. I understand that. However, more on that in a minute. So she would work with Melissa Rosenberg, who was the screenwriter for this project, by having Rosenberg finish the script one scene at a time, send it to Meyer for her to make comments, and then send it back to her to change the script based on her comments, which is not the best way to do things, but it's certainly a way. Like, let me give you a for instance. Instead of being a meek, plain, unassuming character who thinks that a sexy outfit consists of a khaki skirt, a single hair clip, and a navy button-up blouse, Bella is a star athlete in the movies. A lot of people drew comparison between how Bella is described in the books quote, a very pale complexion, long, straight, dark brown hair, with a widow's peak, a unique chocolate brown eye color, and a heart-shaped face with a wide forehead. And the way Meyer looks in real life, which I don't particularly take issue with, again, that's up to you. More on that later, if I feel like talking about it. A few other notes that I'm going to go over are that there's a lot of eating at this local diner between Charlie and Bella, when in the book, Bella is the one cooking for Charlie for almost every single meal, making breakfast for him, making breakfast for herself before she goes to school, making lunch for him to take to work, making dinner for them every night. Again, more on that later. Victoria, James, and Laurent only appear once in the book as a group, whereas in the movies they are a recurring trio of characters that create most of the antagonism and conflict in the story. More on that later. Jacob tells Bella that Edward is a vampire because of his tribe's legends, making mentions of cold ones, whereas, however, in the movies, she just kind of puts two and two together based on these weird cryptic inferences people are making about him. Again, not a big deal. Here's where we get into some stuff. Some pretty messy stuff. A lot of characters that are mentioned as having curly hair in the books have straight hair, or have hair so short that you can't tell whether there's a curl or not. I don't know. Just weird to me. Bella finds it really ironic that there's a cross hanging in the Cullens' house, because usually vampires are somehow injured or their strength is sapped from cross imagery or crucifix imagery and stuff like that. All the vampires in the Cullen family are over 6 feet tall. Don't know why that needed to be specified. More on that later. In the books, there's a Sadie Hawkins type dance, as well as in the prom, but in the movie, there is only prom. I don't know whether that has to do with this conservative idea that women and girls aren't fit to make their own choices as to who they want to be romantically entangled with, but that's what I'm kind of getting from that. Given her background in Mormonism, which is something that she has explicitly stated is endemic to the creation of this book, I don't doubt it. That's all I really care to talk about that. So another thing that I wanted to talk about in regard to this transition between book and movie is Catherine Hardwicke, the director of the original Twilight film, the comments that she made very recently over the summer. I'm sorry, that was 2 years ago. But still relevant because the book is coming out, the new one. And she noted that there was an intentional pivot away from ethnic diversity and female agency that stemmed from Stephenie Meyer herself. In comments with an interview with the Daily Beast, which I never really like to use as a source, Hardwicke remarked that Meyer was totally against the idea of a diverse cast. She said she had not really written it that way, so she probably just didn't see the world that way. I had all these ideas regarding diversity, and she just could not accept the Cullens to be more diverse, because she really saw them in her mind. She knew who each character was representing in a way, a personal friend or a relative or something. She said, I wrote that they had pale, glistening skin. On its face, if you... I can't even really think of anything to speak forgivingly of that statement. That's pretty much just, I don't want anybody who isn't white in my movie. Not on Hardwicke's part, but on Meyer's part. And then Hardwicke went on to make more comments about Stephenie Meyer's behavior regarding casting and the adaptation from book to movie. She went on to say that Meyer would only accept there being any semblance of diversity if Kenyan-American actor Eddie Gategi played Laurent, who Hardwicke described as one of the scary antagonistic vampires. Laurent. The only reason that came through was he was described as having olive skin. And I said, there are black olives out there. Moving on. In a similar aspect, Hardwicke noticed that there was pushback on Meyer's part on Bella's agency being increased from book to the movie. Hardwicke remarked that she and Rosenberg fought Meyer to make Bella less passive than she was in the book. And although Hardwicke says Bella originally comes into her own power in the book in her own way, it's still pretty telling that you as a creative part of this project are very much digging your heels in the sand when it comes to letting women be seen as people, or letting people of color be seen as people. So even from Meyer's own mouth, this was not meant to be an inclusive series. It was meant to portray heroism and villainy in a very specific way, both on a basis of base and gender, in a way that people noticed and took issue with from the inception of the cinematic project. who Meyer seemed to totally steamroll. In her own admission, just from Hardwick's comments, Meyer sees protagonists as white and antagonists as black, or at the very least ethnically ambiguous. This goes back to what I said in the book section, that there is a specific narrative Meyer is working with in regard to race and ethnicity. In her worldview and in the worldview of her literary work, white people are good and moral blondes and brunettes whose women are passive and submissive, and everybody outside these boundaries is evil and out to get them, when really they're just minding their own business. Which brings me to religious themes. So, Stephenie Meyer is a Mormon who was raised in Phoenix, Arizona. Another point on the board for Twilight is self-insert fanfiction. Not that self-insert fanfiction is bad, I think just her work would be better if it just wasn't wildly racist and misogynist. This is just another questionable point, I guess, not in and of itself, but specifically because it's related to her. Something that a lot of people were critiquing and analyzing with this series, they have noticed that Meyer engages a lot with the tenets of this faith system as a foundational point to her narrative surrounding characters, their dynamics, and the conflicts that result. This is going to take a minute. Not a full minute, like 60 seconds, but it's gonna be a time. Here is what we know about the Mormon faith and its relationship to race. Joseph Smith, the founding figure of the faith, described the Book of Mormon as a chronicle of indigenous people in the U.S. So already he's co-opting indigenous identity as part of white Christians. We're off to a horrible start. The Book of Mormon states that the Nephites were the designated remnants of what is referred to as the lost tribes of Israel, because in the Bible, Jesus told Jewish people in Jerusalem that other sheep would hear his voice. Scholars attribute this to be a direct result of the theological debate occurring in America in the 1800s among European Americans Christian scholars over Jewish people and indigenous people being intrinsically related, which went from the 16th to the 19th century. I mean, there are Jewish indigenous people, but it's not because Jewish people are these long-lost ancestors of indigenous people. Like, that was essentially the line of logic that they were creating and running with. So now we're getting into appropriating the Jewish identity, both ethnically and religiously, and co-opting indigenous American identity. Even worse start. There's a 9-minute animated film being distributed on YouTube by Jeremiah Films, which I'll link below, which is based on actual literature, which was distributed by the church to the public for a significant amount of time. And it states that the myth surrounding the faith is this. So this is the way that it goes. Elohim was conceived by a god and one of his goddess wives on one of trillions of planets in space, a blonde white baby. Elohim was given a physical body on Earth by being born to a human husband and wife, and was then elevated to godhood himself through strict adherence to the Mormon faith. Elohim and his goddess wives produced billions of spirit children, all blonde white people. When Elohim called together a council meeting of the other gods, his son Lucifer and Jesus were present. Elohim proposed that the spirit children would be sent to Earth to learn good from evil in human bodies. Lucifer wanted to take position as savior of these humans and wanted them to become gods by default, whereas Jesus suggested that they be given the choice to become gods. When the council approved Jesus' plans instead of Lucifer's, Lucifer spoke with a third, it specified a third, and asked why they should not join him and revolt. These spirits would not be given bodies. Those who neither sided with Jesus nor with Lucifer would still be sent to Earth, but they would be cursed. It specifies the word cursed, with dark skin and black hair. The voiceover specifies that this is the Mormon explanation for the Negro race. Lighter-skinned people would be those whose spirit selves sided with Jesus and are described as white and delightsome, as the Book of Mormon describes them. Elohim and one of his wives were sent to Earth to start the human race, which the Book of Mormon teaches is in Davids County, Missouri. Elohim has sex with Mary to provide Jesus with a physical body, for whom Joseph Smith claimed direct descendants. In the text, it then says that Jesus went to the Americas to preach to indigenous people who are called, quote, Lamanites, who then were said to have viciously attacked him for wanting to bring them to the light, so to speak, and by 421 AD, this is the date specified in the Book of Mormon, the Lamanites chose to wipe out the chosen white people called Nephites. When you die, you stand in judgment before Joseph Smith, Jesus, and Elohim, and they determine your ability to ascend to godhood. Based on the previous information that I've been able to find, it seems that there is some inherent disadvantage being levied against people of color, specifically black and indigenous people, and anyone who isn't a light-skinned, blonde, white person, which means they need to do twice as work in order to be seen as worthy before this council. Not a fan of that. Also, I'm not really going to talk about the cousin fucking that goes on within a bunch of different Mormon sects of belief, but I have a sneaking suspicion that it has less to do with the actual tenets of the Mormon faith and more about the European American ideal of keeping it in the family in regard to property rights and wealth rights, the way they were structured during the time that Joseph Smith founded this faith. I'm be real with y'all, I don't give a shit about the secret underwear, polygamy, or anything like that particularly. If you all want to do that consensually, that is fine, and I don't care. What I care about is this, is that from 1848 to 1978, almost 100 years, Black Mormons were banned from the position of priesthood, missions work, or even being married in their chosen temple. To this day, Mormons of color are still forbidden from occupying positions of power in the innermost sanctum of the Central Mormon Church, where the sacred texts of this faith are kept. Now, here's the thing, is that the very institution of missionary work in the Americas, whether it be Catholic, Christian, or Mormon, is directly linked to instances of spiritual, physical, and sexual abuse being exacted upon Indigenous people. And as a practitioner of the Mormon faith, you have to go on missionary work. Like, that is just non-negotiable. And to force people to proliferate that cycle of spiritual abuse and go to these communities in order to continue that hold that churches have through colonization and imperialism, that hold that they have on Indigenous people in the Americas is just, that doesn't sit right with me spiritually. This is abuse, that is still being framed today as we're reckoning with the residential school system and how much pain and death and suffering it caused unnecessarily. It is still framed today as a reparative form of therapy, this submission to mission work, as though Indigenous people are inherently broken and in need of fixing solely for the fact that we are Indigenous. The reason why I went through all this is because all of these things are a foundational part of this literary and movie franchise. The white gaze of Black people as inherently violent and antagonistic, and of Indigenous people as being sex-crazed predators who are ready to pounce on you and steal your innocence. The passive submissive daughter who acts as both wife and child to her father. The idolatry of white skin. It's all connected to something, and we're going to talk about that in a second. It isn't just problematic. It's a part of behavior. It is a pattern of behavior. Meyer purports Twilight as a literary and movie series as an extension of her Mormon identity and faith. By being so intentional with her representation choices, what she is doing is drawing a direct correlation between the Mormon faith and a world where white is what encompasses good and innocent, and anything outside that boundary is an attack on those things. Twilight as a concept, out of Meyer's own mouth, is purely just racist. One more hydration break before I get into this, because it is a lot. So let's talk about the division between what is problematic and what is racist. The reason why I wanted to talk about this is because a lot of people during this Twilight Renaissance over the summer were excusing all of that shit that I just talked about as problematic and emblematic of the time period in which it was written, which means that by today's standards it is just lacking in enlightenment and we all need to accept that. But here's the thing. Stephenie Meyer didn't just broach sexism, misogyny, colorism, racism, and incest by replicating the stereotypical representation of marginalized people and incestuous weirdness that was going around in the early aughts. She said that Black and Indigenous people are violent predators and we must protect white people at all costs by keeping it in the family with her whole fucking chest, and we all fucking let her. The line between problematic and racist in this context is just that. She maintains to this day that all those things are endemic to the series, and her casting choices for the movies were so solid that they are unshakable. When you tone down what she did as problematic instead of intentionally done with an attitude of bigotry, you are watering down what she did as excusable and therefore acceptable. There is no way to excuse the depth of racism, misogyny, and cousin fucking that exists in this franchise. There just isn't. Also, Jasper was a whole-ass Confederate major. It's the 1850s. Do you really think they're gonna hunt down a white man and force him to do something he don't want to do? You could do anything in the 1850s if you did it fast enough. There was no fucking reason for this. There just wasn't. Another thing that also bothers me is that it isn't other vampires who are coming to protect Bella against Laurent. It's Jacob and other werewolves in his tribe that are specifically positioned to attack Laurent in order to protect Bella. Specifically, which to me really feels representative of the way people of color are being pitted against each other in order to preserve this position of white people above everybody else. but that could also just be the trope of two adversaries come together to meet a shared goal of protecting this bland, flavorless white woman. And I truly cannot parse out the difference because Meyer makes it incredibly difficult, which brings me to my next point. The hot take of the Twilight fandom is this: you only hate Twilight because girls like it. No. This talking point was acceptable maybe in the early 2010s, even originally when the book came out, but no more. I will not accept this lukewarm excuse of racism as a hot take, because here's the thing. There are absolutely forms of media that people shit on because the fan base is predominantly women, girls, or non-male people. I'm not denying that. You can take people's reaction to the K-pop genre's popularity as a perfect example. What I think this is deflecting criticism to the very present misogyny, sexism, colorism, and racism, and weird cousin fucking, by throwing other marginalized people, or just marginalized people, cousin fuckers are not marginalized, by throwing a group of marginalized people in front of it. Especially right now in 2021, more people than ever are trying to grapple with what feminism, racism, colorism, inclusivity, what all these things mean in the grand scheme of the world. And I can't believe people are really willing to take this deflection as a genuine criticism when it really isn't. It's an extension of a bad faith argument, because I feel like white women have this habit of empathizing with people of color by using their gender identity as a reference point, because they've never experienced racial discrimination, so their only point of reference for oppression is gender discrimination. So in that respect, by saying, it's a girl thing, that's why you don't like it, sounds like a valid criticism in their mind, when it isn't. I get wanting to crystallize that nostalgia we had when this book came out. I really do. But a lot of us are adults now. This came out when I was barely 10, and I'm 23 now. I can still appreciate the camaraderie that I had with my friends when this came out. We were all playing vampires and werewolves on the playground and planning coordinated carpools to go see all these movies. Some of us even did book reports on it. But right now, we need to put on our big kid pants and see the core ethics and morals of this text for what they really are. The novelty of vampires versus werewolves is absolutely fine. The love triangle premise is also fine. The ironic nostalgia we have for broody mystery boy falls in love with pick-me girl is something that keeps us laughing at the fact that this man is sparkly like a Rihanna dress. That's fine. Even the pseudo-incest is something I do not particularly care about. But when all those things are hedged on the bet that you will agree with her personal, long-standing views on race, gender, and skin color, it needs to be rejected. Be an adult, hold your literary idols to higher standards, find a new hobby. So on that basis, I get where people are coming from with this because there is precedent to make that argument, but in this case, in this iteration of Twilight criticism with Twilight itself, it doesn't hold water, and I'm not sorry to say that. So where have we been? Surprisingly, we have been many places. Let's take a look. We've discussed the issues in racial representation within the scope of the novels alone, and then within the scope of the movies on their own and concerning casting choices. We've discussed the issues that arose in the transition from book to screen and regarding to casting, and the particular narrative that Meyer herself said she wanted to put forth. We've also delved deep into the issues concerning the way her Mormon background has shaped the way she made these casting and production choices, and the narrative that this has put forth in the books and the movies. We've also drawn a line between problematic and intentionally bigoted, because apparently that's a thing we still need to learn the difference between. I've decided, for all of us, that we need to put on our big kid pants and maybe leave this one in the 2000s where we found it. My final thoughts on this are that I resent the fact that Stephenie Meyer's creative work has gotten as far as it has. I resent the fact that she has made millions of dollars off of this incredibly bigoted and offensive piece of shit. I resent the fact that the Quileute tribe, whose imagery she appropriated, whose culture she has profited off of, still have not been able to raise enough money to move their tribe out of an actively dangerous flood zone, despite how much money this fuck of a white woman has made off of them. My cousins on whose land she stands while she slanders them have not seen a single penny of profits from this vanity project she has made. I'm angry about it. Their basic needs cannot be met because she has turned them into this caricature that is meant to be used by her. I'm angry about it. I'm really fucking angry about it. I'm angry because I have to question my worth as a writer, even though I'm in a master's program on scholarship because my work is good. It's recognized by other people in this community of writers as good. I have to question that. I have imposter syndrome when she doesn't. Even though this is objectively bad. Her shit is bad. It's genuinely infuriating. She never has to question any aspect of her work as being truly talented. And frankly, I think she fucking should. 'Cause she isn't. That being said, as an Afro-Indigenous person and an aspiring writer, fuck Stephenie Meyer. That's all I have to say. I have no interest in further dialogue on this subject. That's it. If you want to argue with me, do it in the comments and show all your friends on a bunch of different social media networks so you can boost my engagement rate. Dislike it to shit. I don't care. No more Twilight. Society has progressed past the need for weird religiously based racism. Oh yeah, and no more Stephenie Meyer. Society has progressed past the need for Stephenie Meyer. If you are interested in helping the Quileute tribe relocate to a safer area out of an active flood zone, please go to their donations page, which I will link below in the description box, and remember that even a contribution of $1 helps. This saga has been going on for 17 fucking years. Both it and their struggle have gone on long enough. Alright, that is it, surprisingly. I'm done being mad about this. Yeah, because this was a big part of my childhood growing up in the 2000s and 2010s. But as I got older, I was like, this isn't that great of a thing. And it had very little to do with the fact of the structure of it being written or the narrative that was being framed around it, because I've never particularly cared about that as a person. It had more to do with the fact that people were like, hey, I'm an Indigenous person, or hey, I'm a Black person. I take issue with the way that people in my community are being represented by this. And I had empathy for that, you know? And that's a basic part of understanding why this is such a bad piece of creative work, is just having basic empathy for the way that people of color and women are being treated within the world of this novel. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, and fuck Stephenie Meyer too.